Picture this. Deep beneath the surface of New Zealand's South Island, in the year 1987, a team of cavers is navigating a labyrinth of ancient limestone passages. The air is cool and still. The only sounds the crunch of their boots on the rocky floor and the distant drip of water. Their headlamps cut narrow beams through an absolute darkness that has persisted for millennia. In one chamber, the light sweeps across a pile of sediment and rock, and then it stops. There, nestled in the earth as if placed there just yesterday, is something that should not exist. It isn't a fossil, not mere stone and impression. It is a limb, complete with skin and muscle, ending in a formidable, scaly claw. This was not the bone of a long-dead animal. This was a piece of the animal itself, seemingly frozen in time. The shock of that moment is almost impossible to overstate. They were staring directly at a creature that the entire world believed had been wiped from the earth, not for decades, but for centuries. This is the story of the Mount Owen Moa, and the incredible, perfectly preserved claw that defied all understanding of time and decay. What these explorers had accidentally unearthed was far more than a curious artifact. It was a natural time capsule of breathtaking significance. The moa was a giant, flightless bird that once roamed the forests of New Zealand, a true titan of the avian world standing over 10 feet tall. And yet, by the time European settlers arrived, it was already a ghost, a legend spoken of by the Maori people, but vanished from the living world, hunted to extinction around 500 years earlier. Every scientific principle told those cavers that such a find was impossible. Organic material, skin, flesh, tendon simply does not last that long exposed to the elements. It decomposes, it breaks down, it returns to the earth. So how could this claw, this tangible piece of a lost giant, have survived intact? The answer transforms this discovery from a mere curiosity into one of the most profound paleontological miracles of the modern era. A puzzle that forces us to reconsider the very boundaries of preservation. So, how did this happen? What unique set of circumstances conspired to protect this incredible relic, offering us a direct, visceral link to a prehistoric world? The journey to unravel this mystery takes us deep into the heart of the mountain itself, into the silent, cold, and oxygen-poor environment that acted as a perfect natural refrigerator. It's a tale that intertwines blind chance with scientific revelation, where a single beam of light in the dark revealed a secret the Earth had kept perfectly hidden for half a millennium. We're about to explore not just the claw itself, but the incredible story of the creature it belonged to, the environment that preserved it, and the stunning implications of holding a piece of the past that simply refused to turn to dust. This is a journey into one of history's most captivating and tangible enigmas. The expedition into the Mount Owen cave system was far from a casual weekend trip. This was a serious speleological survey, a mapping mission into one of the most extensive and complex labyrinths in the Southern Hemisphere. The team, members of the Nelson Caving Group, were experienced and prepared, accustomed to navigating the tight squeezes and vast chambers of the underworld. On that day in 1987, their focus was on the system's geology, charting passages that had been forming for millions of years within the Takaka Hill marble. The air was heavy with a profound stillness, the temperature a constant, chilling cool that seeped into their bones. Their world was reduced to the pools of light cast by their helmet lamps, illuminating glittering flowstone formations and shadows that had known no other light for eons. It was within this context of disciplined exploration that the extraordinary occurred. Deep in a remote chamber, their lights swept across a subfossil deposit, a collection of ancient sediments and bones that had accumulated over thousands of years. And there, partially embedded in the clay-like earth, was an object that made them stop dead. It wasn't the familiar, bleached white appearance of a typical bone. This was different. It had substance, texture, and color. It was a leg and a foot, covered in a leathery, mummified skin, and it ended in a set of sharp, formidable talons. The initial reaction wasn't one of immediate celebration, but of pure, unadulterated confusion. It looked so fresh, so recently deceased, that their first thought was of a modern animal that had somehow wandered deep into the cave and perished. But the scale was all wrong. Nothing that large lived in New Zealand's forests anymore. The sheer, visceral presence of the claw, looking as if it could still grasp and tear, created a cognitive dissonance that was both thrilling and unsettling. They were experienced cavers, not paleontologists, but they knew enough to understand that they were looking at something that defied all logic. They had not simply found a remnant of the past, they had seemingly reached through a crack in time and pulled a piece of it directly into the present. To truly grasp the magnitude of the discovery in that cave, we first need to understand the creature it came from, a being so extraordinary it seems to belong more to myth than to reality. The moa was not a single species, but an entire family of flightless birds, with 9 distinct species ranging in size from that of a large turkey to the true titans of the group. The undisputed kings were the 2 species of giant moai from the genus Dinornis. Standing with their long necks outstretched, these birds could reach a staggering 12 feet in height, tall enough to look a modern giraffe in the eye. They were not just tall, but massively built, with estimates suggesting the largest females could weigh over 500 pounds. They were the dominant herbivores of their world, moving through the dense, primeval forests on powerful, pillar-like legs. And unlike almost every other bird, they had absolutely no trace of wings, not even a residual wing bone. They were, in the most complete sense of the word, truly and utterly flightless. This was an animal that had committed its entire evolutionary existence to life on the ground, and in its isolated home. That strategy had worked perfectly for millions of years. This unique evolutionary path was made possible by the world the moa inhabited. New Zealand was, and remains, one of the most geographically isolated major landmasses on Earth. It split from the supercontinent Gondwana around 80 million years ago, drifting into the vastness of the southern Pacific long before mammals like deer, predators like wolves, or even primitive primates had risen to dominance elsewhere. This meant that when the moa's ancestors, small, flying birds, first arrived, they found a land of immense opportunity, a vast ecosystem almost entirely free of terrestrial mammals. There were no packs of predators to hunt them, no large herbivores to compete with for the lush vegetation. In this incredible vacuum, these birds underwent a radical evolutionary transformation known as adaptive radiation. They diversified to fill every available niche. Smaller moa browsed on shrubs and ferns, while the giants like Dinornis evolved long necks to reach the leaves and fruits in the forest canopy. Their bodies grew larger and more robust, and their wings, no longer needed for escape, gradually disappeared entirely. They became the deer, the antelope, and the elephants of their own unique world, a land ruled by birds. Imagine walking through those ancient forests. The air would be filled with the calls of strange, now extinct birds, but the most imposing presence would be the moa. A creature of such immense scale moving through the undergrowth would have been a sight to inspire both awe and perhaps a little fear. Their small heads, perched on those serpentine necks, would be constantly in motion, stripping leaves from trees and ferns with their tough, beaked mouths. The forest floor would vibrate with their heavy, deliberate footsteps. This was a stable, balanced world that had endured for epochs, a testament to the power of isolation. The arrival of the moa's only real threat, humans, was still thousands of years in the future. For countless generations, these gentle giants were the undisputed masters of their island realm, a lost world of giants that thrived in peaceful solitude until the world finally, and tragically, discovered them. When the claw was carefully extracted and brought into the light for proper study, scientists were confronted with an object that challenged the very definition of a fossil. This wasn't a stone impression or a collection of fragile, mineralized bones. It was, in the most tangible sense, a body part. The leg section was substantial, measuring over a foot in length from the scaled foot up to where it would have connected to the bird's massive body. The skin covering it was a tough, leathery hide, desiccated and darkened by age, yet it still retained its essential structure. You could see the patterning of the scales on the foot, each one defined and distinct, and in places, you could even make out the follicles where feathers would have been anchored. Beneath this skin, the muscles had not completely decayed into nothingness. They had mummified, shrinking and hardening into a dense, fibrous mass that still clung tenaciously to the bone. Most incredibly, the tendons, the tough, elastic cords that animate a living creature were still in place. They were brittle with age, of course, but their presence was a scientific marvel. These are the first tissues to decompose in a carcass, and here they were, intact after half a millennium, allowing researchers to trace the very mechanics of how this giant bird would have moved. The most arresting feature, however, was the business end of this incredible limb, the talons themselves. There were 4 primary toes, 3 facing forward and 1 facing back, each tipped with a claw that was not merely a nail, but a formidable, curved weapon. These talons were made of keratin, the same substance as our own fingernails, but they were thick, heavily ridged, and came to a wickedly sharp point even after all this time. To understand the sheer power of these claws, we can compare them to the most formidable modern bird, the cassowary. A cassowary's inner claw is a fearsome, dagger-like structure that can be lethal. The talons of the giant moa were on an entirely different scale, broader, thicker, and built to support a creature many times the cassowary's weight. They weren't designed for killing prey, as the moa was a peaceful browser, but for stability and defense. Imagine the force such a claw could exert. A single, powerful kick from a 500-pound bird could have delivered a devastating blow, capable of shredding bark, digging for roots, or deterring the large host's eagle, its only natural predator. Holding this claw, one isn't just holding a relic, one is holding the very tool of a giant, an instrument of survival from a lost world. This level of preservation was what sent shockwaves through the scientific community. Under normal conditions, the process of decomposition is swift and relentless. Bacteria, insects, fungi, and exposure to the elements break down soft tissues in a matter of weeks or months. Even in a protected environment like a cave, one would expect to find, at best, a skeleton after a few hundred years. The fact that this claw retained its skin, muscle, and tendons was, quite simply, unbelievable. It defied every established model of organic decay. This was not a case of permineralization, where minerals slowly replace organic matter to create a stony replica. This was the original biological material, preserved in a state that was so pristine it seemed to mock the relentless passage of time. The initial, almost instinctive reaction of the cavers, that it must be from a recently deceased animal, was a testament to just how anomalously fresh it appeared. The discovery forced a complete reevaluation of what is possible in paleontology. It proved that under a perfect, and perfectly rare, set of environmental conditions, the rules of nature can be suspended, allowing a piece of life to be passed directly from one millennium to the next, bypassing the dust and oblivion that claims almost everything else. But to understand how this piece of a giant could endure for centuries, we need to leave the world of sunlight and venture back into the specific, almost otherworldly environment of the cave itself. The Mount Owen cave system is not merely a hole in the ground. It's a meticulously controlled natural laboratory where the normal rules of decay are put on hold. The preservation of the Moa Claw wasn't a single miracle, but the result of a perfect, and perfectly rare, combination of several environmental factors working in concert to create a state of suspended animation. The first and perhaps most critical factor is the temperature. Deep within the limestone labyrinth, the temperature remains remarkably constant, hovering just a few degrees above freezing year-round. This constant chill acts as a powerful natural refrigerator, dramatically slowing down the metabolic processes of the bacteria and fungi that would normally feast on soft tissue. It's the same principle we use in our own kitchens to keep food from spoiling, but on a geological timescale, this simple cooling effect becomes a powerful force of preservation. Equally important is the cave's humidity level. The air in these deep chambers isn't just cool, it's also consistently damp, but not wet. This delicate balance is crucial. If the environment were completely saturated with water, the tissues would become waterlogged and eventually rot. If it were too dry, the claw would have simply desiccated into a brittle, fragile shell that would have crumbled to dust at the slightest touch. Instead, the cave maintained a stable, high humidity that allowed for a process known as desiccation mummification. In this process, moisture slowly evaporates from the tissues, but it does so at such a controlled rate that the cellular structure doesn't collapse. The skin and muscles slowly dry out, hardening and becoming leathery while retaining their original form. It's a natural version of the processes used to create jerky or to mummify bodies in arid deserts, but it requires that perfect, stable humidity to succeed over centuries. Then there is the profound and perpetual darkness. Sunlight is a powerful agent of decay. Its ultraviolet radiation breaks down organic molecules, bleaching and destroying tissues over time. Within the absolute black of the cave, this destructive energy is completely absent. The claw was shielded in a timeless vault, where the only change was the imperceptibly slow drip of mineral-rich water from the ceiling. This brings us to the final piece of the preservation puzzle, the chemistry of the cave itself. The Mount Owen caves are formed in marble, a metamorphic rock derived from limestone, which is primarily composed of calcium carbonate. Water filtering down from the surface dissolves tiny amounts of this mineral, and as it drips or seeps over organic material, it can gently coat it in a thin, protective layer of calcite. This isn't the full fossilization process where minerals replace the original bone, but rather a subtle encasement that helps to seal the tissues from the air, further inhibiting bacterial growth and physical erosion. It's this synergy, the constant cold, the perfect humidity, the total darkness, and the mineral-rich environment that created a sanctuary where time itself seemed to stand still, protecting this incredible relic from the inevitable march of decay that claims almost all other life. Of course, the claw's stunning state of preservation posed an immediate and pressing question for the researchers who first laid hands on it. Just how old was it? It looked impossibly fresh, but looks can be deceiving in the world of paleontology. To solve this chronological puzzle, they turned to one of the most trusted tools in the archaeological toolkit, radiocarbon dating. This process, which sounds incredibly complex, is based on a beautifully simple principle that plays out in every living thing on Earth. All living organisms absorb carbon from the environment, and a tiny, consistent fraction of that carbon is an unstable, radioactive form known as carbon-14. While an organism is alive, it continually replenishes its supply of carbon-14, maintaining a steady balance with the atmosphere. But the moment it dies, that intake stops. The clock starts ticking. From that point on, the carbon-14 trapped within its tissues begins to decay at a known, steady rate. Its half-life is about 5,730 years. By carefully extracting a tiny sample from the claw, often just a few milligrams of collagen from the bone, or even from the preserved skin itself, scientists can measure the remaining amount of carbon-14. By comparing the ratio of remaining radioactive carbon to stable carbon, they can calculate, with remarkable precision, how long it has been since that creature drew its last breath. When the results came back from the lab, they confirmed that the discovery was every bit as extraordinary as it appeared. The carbon isotopes told a clear and astonishing story. This particular giant moa, the individual whose claw was now being studied under bright lights in a modern laboratory, had lived and died approximately 3,000 years ago. Let that number sink in for a moment, 3,000 years. This places the bird's life squarely in the Holocene epoch, a time when the Great Pyramids of Giza were still centuries from being built in Egypt, and the Bronze Age was flourishing in Europe. In the context of New Zealand's human history, this date is utterly transformative. For a long time, there was a lingering romantic notion that the moa and the first Maori may have only briefly overlapped, a fleeting moment in ecological time. But this date, 3,000 years before the present, places this moa in a world where Polynesian explorers had already reached Aotearoa's shores. The current archaeological consensus, supported by evidence like the Werau Bar settlement, suggests the first humans arrived around 700 to 800 years ago. This means this specific moa did not live in some pristine, pre-human wilderness. It lived and died over 2,000 years before the first waka, the first canoes, ever landed on these beaches. Its world was still one of total avian dominion, untouched by the one predator that would ultimately spell the end for its kind. This revelation deepens the mystery and the tragedy of the moa's extinction. The claw is not a relic from the very last moa that ever lived. It is a snapshot of a thriving population from a much earlier era. Its pristine preservation tells us that the conditions in the Mount Owen cave system were so exceptionally stable that they could protect organic matter not just for a few centuries, but for millennia. This single data point expands our understanding of the moa's timeline, proving they were a robust and established part of the ecosystem for thousands of years, not a fragile population already on the brink. The significance of the date also lies in what it tells us about the extinction event itself. The moa did not fade away due to a slow-changing climate or some unknown disease. They vanished with startling speed after human arrival. The fossil record shows that by the mid-15th century, just a few hundred years after Polynesian settlement, every one of the 9 moa species was gone. The claw, by its very age, acts as a silent witness to this catastrophe. It represents the long, stable reign of these giants, a reign that was abruptly and permanently ended by a combination of overhunting and the habitat destruction that followed human colonization. This one date transforms the claw from a mere curiosity into a poignant benchmark, marking the immense span of time these magnificent birds ruled the islands and highlighting the breathtaking speed with which they were erased from existence. To truly appreciate the world this specific moa inhabited, we need to step back and paint a mental picture of New Zealand as it was 3,000 years ago. This was not the landscape of rolling green pastures and introduced pine forests we might associate with the country today. This was a true primeval world, a vast and tangled tapestry of life that had evolved in near-total isolation for 80 million years. The first thing that would strike a modern observer would be the sheer density and strangeness of the plant life. Imagine a forest where the familiar sounds of mammals are entirely absent, no squirrels chattering, no deer rustling in the undergrowth. Instead, the air is filled with a chorus of birdsong, some melodic, but many others producing bizarre, haunting calls unlike anything heard elsewhere on the planet. The canopy was dominated by ancient, towering podocarp trees, massive rimu, Cahicadia, and totara, their branches draped in thick layers of mosses, lichens, and a bewildering array of ferns that grew not just on the ground, but as epiphytes high in the branches. The forest floor was a soft, spongy mattress of decaying vegetation, creating a hushed, almost cathedral-like atmosphere beneath the dense green ceiling. It was a world of perpetual twilight on the ground, with shafts of sunlight piercing through only in rare clearings. This unique flora was a direct result of New Zealand's profound isolation. In the absence of browsing mammals, many plants never evolved the common defenses seen elsewhere, like sharp thorns or toxic leaves. Instead, they developed what is known as the devaricating growth form, a tangled, wiry, interlocked way of branching that created an impenetrable thicket, likely as a defense against the one thing that did browse upon them, the giant moa. Walking through these forests would have been incredibly difficult for a human, but for the moa, their long, powerful legs and necks were the perfect tools for navigating this dense, vertical landscape. They were the ecosystem's primary architects. As they moved, they dispersed the seeds of the very trees they fed on through their droppings. They pruned the understory, created pathways, and their constant foraging shaped the structure of the forest itself. The presence of these avian giants was woven into the very fabric of the environment. The plants had evolved alongside them, and the forest's health was intrinsically linked to their existence. Sharing this verdant world was a cast of other unique characters, each playing a role in a complex ecological drama. The forest floor was home to an array of smaller, flightless birds like the teika and the kekapo, a heavy, nocturnal parrot that used its keen sense of smell to navigate in the dark. The skies, however, held the moa's only true natural threat, a predator so formidable it seems to be the stuff of legend, the Haast's eagle. This was not just another bird of prey. It was the largest eagle known to have ever existed, with a wingspan stretching up to 10 feet and a body weight that could exceed 30 pounds. Its talons were massive, each one comparable in size to those of a tiger, and its robust beak was a powerful tool for tearing into flesh. Recent studies suggest its hunting technique was one of breathtaking power and precision. It would likely soar above the forest canopy, its incredible eyesight scanning for a target, then tuck its wings and dive in a burst of speed, striking its prey with the force of a cinder block dropped from a great height. Its primary target was the moa. An eagle of this size could not afford to hunt small game. It needed a massive meal, and the 200 to 500-pound moa provided just that. The relationship between the host's eagle and the moa was a classic, if extreme, predator-prey dynamic that had balanced itself over millennia. The eagles would have culled the old, the sick, or the young and vulnerable moa, helping to keep the populations healthy and in check. The moa, in turn, evolved their own formidable size and defenses, and their keen senses would have been constantly alert for the shadow of the eagle passing overhead. This was a world in a state of perfect, if brutal, equilibrium. There were no other large predators. The only other significant hunter was the Isles's harrier, a huge, flight-capable hawk that likely scavenged carcasses and hunted smaller birds, but it was no match for a healthy adult moa. This ecosystem was a closed loop, a self-regulating machine where every creature, from the smallest insect to the towering moa and the majestic eagle, had a specific, interdependent role. It was a world that had found its own unique and stable rhythm, a symphony of life playing in isolation, completely unaware that its greatest and final challenge was still centuries away from arriving on distant shores. This long era of ecological stability, this timeless world of giants and eagles, was destined for a revolution. The arrival of humans in Aotearoa, New Zealand, was one of the greatest feats of exploration in human history. Sometime around the 13th century, great double-hulled canoes, known as waka, began to make landfall after an epic voyage across thousands of miles of open Pacific Ocean. These were the Polynesian explorers, the ancestors of the Maori. They had navigated by the stars, the swell of the waves, and the flight paths of birds, carrying with them a cargo of vital plants like the kumara, or sweet potato, and animals like the Polynesian dog, the kuri. They stepped ashore into a world beyond their wildest imaginings, a fertile land teeming with unfamiliar birds, a place with no predatory mammals, and most astonishingly, no other human beings. They were the first people to ever set foot on these islands. The initial encounters between these settlers and the moa must have been scenes of sheer wonder and immense opportunity. Imagine coming from small, densely populated islands where every resource was scarce and contested, and finding yourself in a verdant paradise inhabited by seemingly endless flocks of large, flightless, and utterly unafraid birds. For a people whose survival depended on their ability to adapt and utilize their new environment, the moa represented an unbelievable bounty. A single giant bird could provide an enormous quantity of meat, enough to feed a large family group for days. Its tough skin and feathers could be used for clothing and adornment, and its massive bones could be fashioned into a variety of essential tools. The archaeological record provides clear and compelling evidence of this relationship, painting a picture of a society that quickly integrated the moa into the very core of its subsistence. The most telling sites are the ancient middens, which were essentially the garbage dumps of early Maori settlements. These are not mere piles of refuse. To archaeologists, they are time capsules, layered archives of daily life. Excavations at key sites like Werau Bar in the South Island and Shag River mouth have uncovered vast quantities of moa bones, often piled high and mixed with shells, stone flakes, and evidence of hearths. The sheer volume of bones is staggering. At some locations, the remains of thousands upon thousands of individual moa have been identified. These bones are not found as complete skeletons, but are typically butchered, broken, and charred, showing clear-cut marks from stone tools and signs of having been cooked over fires. This tells a story not of random encounters, but of systematic, large-scale hunting and processing. The moa was not a rare delicacy. It was a staple food source, a cornerstone of survival for the first several generations of settlers. The tools used in this pursuit have also been recovered in abundance, offering a glimpse into the methods of the hunters. The early Maori did not have metal. Their technology was one of stone, bone, and wood. They crafted razor-sharp adzes from hard stone like paunamu, or greenstone and argillite, which could be used for heavy butchering work. For hunting, evidence suggests the use of sophisticated snares and traps, designed to catch the powerful legs of these giant birds. There are also numerous examples of specialized spear points and lures made from moa bone itself. One particularly evocative find is of bone points that were likely used as lures for fishing, showing how every part of the animal was utilized. The most direct evidence of hunting, however, comes from the discovery of wooden spear points, some still embedded in the ground in positions that suggest they were part of large pitfall traps. These traps would have been camouflaged and dug along the game trails the moa frequented, a testament to the hunters' deep understanding of their prey's behavior. This was not a haphazard operation. It was a coordinated, intelligent, and highly effective strategy for harvesting the most abundant protein source the islands had to offer. For a time, this relationship between people and moa was one of prosperity, a seemingly endless provision from a land of plenty. But this newfound abundance carried within it the seeds of a profound and irreversible change. The prosperity that the moa provided, however, contained a tragic paradox. This seemingly limitless resource masked a fundamental vulnerability in the biology of the giants themselves. Unlike many other large animals that had co-evolved with human hunters, the moa had no innate fear of this new, two-legged predator. More critically, their life history made them exceptionally susceptible to any sustained pressure. These were not animals built for rapid recovery. Scientific analysis of moa bone growth rings suggests they were K-selected species, meaning they invested heavily in a few offspring over a long lifespan. Reaching full maturity likely took a decade or more, and they probably laid only a single, or at most a very small clutch of eggs, each breeding season. In a stable ecosystem, with only the host's eagle as a periodic threat, this slow and steady strategy was a successful one, ensuring that enough young survived to adulthood to maintain the population. But this same strategy became a death sentence when faced with a novel, intelligent, and efficient hunter. The mathematics of the situation were brutally simple. If you are killing adult moa faster than they can be replaced by new generations, the population will inevitably crash. And this is precisely what the archaeological evidence suggests happened with breathtaking speed. The primary driver of this extinction was almost certainly overhunting. The sheer scale of the operation is etched into the landscape itself. Beyond the middens, we find specialized sites known as butchering or kill sites, where dozens of moa were processed at once. At places like the Shag River mouth, the accumulation of bones paints a picture of highly organized, communal hunting efforts. The early Maori were not merely taking the occasional bird for food. They were engaging in what can only be described as resource exploitation on an industrial scale for their time. The moa's very behavior worked against it. With no instinct to flee, they would have been remarkably easy to approach. Hunters could have used simple tactics, driving the birds into natural pitfalls or strategically placed enclosures made of wooden poles, to capture many individuals at once. The moa's size, once its greatest asset, became its greatest liability, making it a large, slow-moving, and incredibly lucrative target. Each successful hunt yielded a massive payoff, encouraging repeated forays. Within just a few generations, this relentless harvesting pressure began to ripple out from the coastal settlements deep into the island interiors. The populations closest to human habitation would have been the first to vanish, followed by those in more remote valleys as hunters expanded their range in search of dwindling prey. But the direct spear thrust was only one part of a multi-pronged assault on the moa's world. Alongside hunting, the newcomers engaged in a practice that radically and permanently altered the landscape: the widespread use of fire. The forests that the moa depended on for food and shelter were vast, but they were also vulnerable. To clear land for agriculture, particularly for the cultivation of the kumara, and to encourage the growth of bracken fern, whose roots were another important food source, the early Maori set fires. These were not small, controlled burns. Pollen records taken from lake and swamp sediments tell a dramatic story. Layers of charcoal suddenly appear in the geological record, coinciding with human arrival, followed by a steep decline in the pollen of tall forest trees and a corresponding rise in the pollen of fire-resistant plants and ferns. This indicates that large tracts of lowland and eastern forests were systematically burned, transforming them from dense woodland into open shrubland and fern fields. For the moa, this was a catastrophe. Their specialized diet of forest leaves and fruits vanished as the trees themselves went up in smoke. Their habitat fragmented and shrank, pushing the remaining populations into smaller and smaller refuges where they were even more concentrated and easier for hunters to find. The hunter wasn't just pursuing the moa, He was also systematically destroying its home. And then there was the silent, unseen threat that arrived in the holds of those first waka, a stowaway that would wage a covert war on the next generation, the Kior, or Polynesian rat. This small, agile rodent found a predator-free paradise in New Zealand, and its population would have exploded. While the adults were too large for rats to threaten, the moa's reproductive strategy placed all its hope in a very vulnerable basket, its eggs. A moa egg was enormous, comparable to 150 chicken eggs, and it would have been a rich, nutritious meal for a colony of rats. Laying their single egg in a simple ground nest, as is common for large flightless birds, the moa had no defense against these new, relentless egg thieves. A single rat could not consume an entire moa egg, but a group could easily gnaw through the thick shell and devour the contents. This introduced a powerful new form of population control. Even if hunting pressure lessened in some areas, the reproductive success of the remaining moa would have been devastatingly low, as a whole generation of potential chicks was lost before they even hatched. The combination of these three factors, direct hunting, habitat loss by fire, and nest predation by rats, created a perfect storm of extinction. Each pressure amplified the others, driving the moa populations downward in an irreversible vortex. The ecological balance that had held for millions of years was shattered within a span of time that was, in geological terms, merely the blink of an eye. For decades, the story of the moa's extinction was often told as a straightforward tragedy, a classic case of human greed meeting naive fauna. Yet, as more evidence has come to light, a fascinating and nuanced debate has emerged within the scientific community, challenging the simplicity of that original narrative. On one side of this intellectual divide stands the powerful and compelling Blitzkrieg hypothesis. This theory, whose name is borrowed from the German for lightning war, posits an extinction event of shocking speed and efficiency. Proponents of this view argue that the first Polynesian settlers encountered a land of plenty, and, with their sophisticated hunting techniques, proceeded to exploit this resource so intensively that the entire moa population was hunted to extinction within a mere century, perhaps even as little as 1 or 2 human generations. The evidence for this rapid overkill model is compelling. The sheer volume of moa bones in early archaeological sites is staggering. At the Werau Bar site alone, estimates suggest the remains of at least 4,000 individual moa, a number that points to relentless, systematic harvesting. The demographic profile of these bone deposits often shows a healthy cross-section of the population: adults, juveniles, and chicks, indicating that hunters were not selectively culling, but were taking every bird they could find, a pattern consistent with a front of exploitation moving swiftly across the landscape and leaving no breeding stock behind. This model suggests a classic boom and bust cycle for the human settlers as well, a brief period of unprecedented abundance followed by a crash as their primary food source vanished, forcing a dramatic shift in their economy and way of life. However, many archaeologists and paleoecologists now argue that the reality was likely more complex and less rapid than the Blitzkrieg scenario suggests. This alternative perspective doesn't deny the central role of human hunting, but it proposes a slower, more complicated decline driven by a synergy of pressures. In this view, the moa didn't simply vanish in a wave of spears. They faded away over a few centuries as their world was systematically dismantled around them. Proponents of this multi-causal theory point to several key factors beyond just hunting. The widespread habitat destruction caused by fire, as we discussed, would have taken time to have its full effect, gradually reducing and fragmenting the moa's living space and food supply over many generations. The impact of the introduced Kior rat on nest success would have been a constant, insidious drain on population recovery, even if hunting pressure lessened in certain areas. Furthermore, some scientists suggest that climate shifts during the Little Ice Age, a period of cooling that began around the 14th century, may have also played a secondary role, perhaps stressing the already vulnerable populations. The argument here is that it was the combined cumulative weight of all these factors, hunting, habitat loss, predation, and possibly climate, that ultimately pushed the moa past a tipping point from which they could not recover. This wasn't a single lightning strike, but a slow-burning crisis. To test these competing ideas, scientists have turned from the trowels of the field to the power of computer modeling. By creating sophisticated population simulations, researchers can input variables like moa reproductive rates, estimated human population growth, and hunting intensity to see which scenarios best match the archaeological evidence. Some of these models have indeed supported the possibility of a very rapid decline, showing that even a relatively small human population, taking just a few moa per person per year, could have driven the birds to extinction in well under 200 years. Other models, however, produce a different outcome. They suggest that while hunting was the primary driver, the extinction process likely played out over a longer period, perhaps 300 to 400 years, and was significantly accelerated by the other environmental pressures. The debate often centers on the interpretation of the very last moa bones found in archaeological sites. If the Blitzkrieg model is correct, these final remains should cluster tightly in time, indicating a swift, final collapse. If the decline was more gradual, we would expect to find evidence of moa in a few remote refuges for a much longer period, even as they disappeared from most of the islands. This academic debate is far from just an intellectual exercise. It carries profound implications for how we understand our own species' relationship with the natural world. The Blitzkrieg narrative presents a powerful cautionary tale about humanity's capacity for rapid, unchecked consumption. It serves as a stark reminder of how quickly a seemingly abundant ecosystem can be irrevocably altered. The more complex, multi-causal story, on the other hand, offers a different, and in some ways more unsettling, lesson. It suggests that extinction is not always a dramatic, single-event catastrophe. It can be a slow, creeping process where no single action seems catastrophic on its own, but the collective impact of hunting, habitat modification, and introduced species creates a death by 1,000 cuts. This model may, in fact, be a more accurate parallel for the environmental crises we face today, where biodiversity loss is driven by a combination of factors that compound over time. The story of the Moa's end is not a simple one, and perhaps that is its greatest relevance. It forces us to move beyond looking for a single villain and to confront the more complicated truth that our greatest impact on the planet often comes from the interconnected, cumulative consequences of our presence. Yet even the Haast's eagle, for all its terrifying power, was not a creature of independent destiny. Its entire existence was a biological wager placed on the continued survival of the moa. This immense raptor was a dietary specialist, an evolutionary masterpiece so perfectly tuned to hunting one type of prey that it could not easily switch to another. An eagle built to take down a 500-pound flightless bird would find little sustenance in trying to catch smaller, faster, and more agile forest birds. The energy required for such a hunt would far outweigh the caloric reward. This created an unbreakable ecological chain linking the fate of the predator directly to the fate of its prey. When the moa populations began their precipitous collapse, the foundation upon which the Haast's eagle had built its empire crumbled away. The great eagles would have faced a swift and brutal famine. As the moa vanished from the lowland forests and then the remote valleys, the eagles' hunting territories would have become ghost lands, a nesting pair, requiring a massive amount of meat to feed themselves and their single chick, would have been forced to range over an ever wider area with diminishing returns. Within a generation or two of the last moa's death, the last Haast's eagle would have taken to the wing, a magnificent and lonely relic soaring over a world it could no longer understand, its evolutionary purpose rendered obsolete. This is a textbook example of what scientists call a co-extinction event, a grim domino effect where the disappearance of one species directly causes the annihilation of another that is inextricably linked to it. The fall of the moa did not just mean the loss of a single bird, it meant the collapse of an entire predatory lineage, the silencing of a hunter's cry that had echoed through the canyons for 1,000,000 years. The story of the Haast's eagle is perhaps the most poignant consequence of the moa's extinction, a stark demonstration that in nature, even the most powerful and dominant are ultimately vulnerable, bound in a web of interdependence where the loss of one thread can unravel an entire ecosystem. While the physical presence of the moa vanished from the forests, its immense spirit never truly left the land. It simply migrated from the world of flesh and bone into the realm of story and memory. For the Maori, the descendants of those first settlers, the Moa, or Kiranui, as it was known in some regions, became an enduring part of their oral tradition, a spectral giant woven into the very identity of Aotearoa. This cultural memory offers a profound and poignant counterpoint to the scientific narrative of extinction, transforming the Moa from a collection of bones into a living entity within the cultural consciousness. The stories passed down through generations are not always explicit historical accounts, but rather powerful echoes of a lost world, preserving the essence of the bird in myth and landscape. One of the most widespread traditions speaks of a vast, secretive bird known as the Tihokioi, a creature of such size that its flapping wings were said to create a thunderous sound. While some elements of these descriptions are fantastical, scholars suggest they could very well be cultural memories of the Moa's formidable presence, or perhaps even its only predator, the Haast's eagle, its shadow and cry immortalized in legend long after the last eagle fell from the sky. The land itself became a living archive, its place names acting as silent memorials to the giant that once walked there. Across New Zealand, you can find locations bearing names that reference the Moa, serving as permanent geographical markers of its former habitat. There are streams known as Waikarapupu, where pupu can refer to a type of shellfish but in some contexts is linked to the Moa, and hills called Mangakiranui, or the Mountain of the Great Moa. These names are far more than simple labels, they are cultural waypoints. They tell us that in this valley, or on that mountain slope, our ancestors encountered these creatures. They mark places where hunting parties were successful, or where the birds were known to gather. For the Maori, whose history is deeply interwoven with the geography of their homeland, these names ensure that the Moa remains a tangible part of the landscape, its story literally written into the hills and rivers, waiting to be read by those who know the language of the land. Further evidence of this long-standing relationship can be found in the silent galleries of rock art left by early Maori. At several significant sites, particularly in the South Island where the largest Moa species thrived, there are ancient drawings etched into limestone shelters and cave walls. The most famous of these is at the Takahanga Mary in Kaikoura, where a striking, stylized image clearly depicts a large, long-necked, flightless bird. While interpreting rock art is always a nuanced process, the resemblance to the skeletal structure of a moa is compelling. These are not the work of people who had only heard vague legends. They feel like the depictions of individuals who had seen these magnificent birds with their own eyes. The act of carving the moa's image into stone was a way of asserting a connection, of saying, "We were here, and they were here with us." It fixed the creature in time and place, creating a permanent record of coexistence that has outlasted the bird itself by centuries. These drawings are a powerful bridge, directly linking the archaeological evidence of bones and tools with the intangible heritage of story and belief. This cultural legacy creates a fascinating and respectful dialogue between traditional knowledge and modern science. For a long time, Western scholars were often skeptical of oral histories, viewing them as myth rather than a valid historical record. The discovery of the moa's physical remains and the subsequent archaeological evidence of a rapid human-driven extinction has fundamentally changed that perspective. The Maori stories about giant birds were not mere fantasy. They were a preserved oral history, a genuine transmission of knowledge about a real animal that their ancestors had known. This reconciliation has led to a much deeper appreciation for the accuracy and longevity of indigenous knowledge systems. The legends, when understood in their proper context, are not just folk tales. They are a different kind of data, one that carries emotional and cultural truth alongside historical fact. They complete the picture, telling us not only that the moa existed, but what its presence meant to the people who shared the land with it. Ultimately, the story of the moa is a deeply human one, etched with both triumph and tragedy. For the early Polynesian settlers, the discovery of the moa was a gift of survival, a providential bounty that allowed their culture to take root and flourish in a new land. The sheer scale of the hunting and the rapid transformation of the landscape speak to a practical, necessary relationship with this incredible resource. Yet, woven into that story of survival is inescapable loss. The disappearance of the moa and the eagle represented the end of a world, a fundamental breaking of the ancient ecological order. The legends and place names that persisted are a testament to that loss, a form of cultural mourning and remembrance. They represent a conscious effort to keep the memory of the giant alive, to ensure that future generations would know of the magnificent creatures that once defined these islands. The enigma of the Mount Owen Claw, then, is more than a scientific curiosity. It is a physical key that unlocks this deeper, cultural story. It connects the cold, hard data of radiocarbon dating directly to the warm, living pulse of oral tradition, proving that the moa's legacy is a tapestry woven from both thread and bone, a story that continues to shape the identity of New Zealand to this very day. To place the Mount Owen Moa Claw in its proper context, we have to look beyond the islands of New Zealand and appreciate that it is part of a much larger, global story of natural preservation. Around the world, specific environmental conditions have occasionally conspired to halt the processes of decay, gifting us with other breathtakingly intact relics of the past. Perhaps the most famous of these are the woolly mammoths of Siberia. For centuries, explorers and scientists have been recovering mammoth remains from the perpetually frozen ground, a layer of earth known as permafrost. In a few extraordinary cases, these aren't just skeletons. They are complete carcasses, with skin, hair, internal organs, and even stomach contents preserved in the deep freeze. The discovery of a mammoth calf, nicknamed Luba in 2007, was a landmark event, revealing an animal so perfectly preserved she looked as if she had only recently passed away, rather than perishing over 40,000 years ago. The permafrost acted as a giant, natural freezer, locking these Ice Age giants in a state of suspended animation. This type of preservation, while stunning, relies on a constant, sub-zero temperature that is unique to the Arctic and subarctic regions of our planet. Venturing from the frozen north to the arid highlands, we find another form of natural mummification at work. In the dry, wind-swept plateaus of the Andes Mountains, the ancient Inca and pre-Inca cultures left behind a remarkable legacy not of frozen giants, but of human mummies. The most famous of these are the children of Lulelaco, 3 Inca children sacrificed on a volcano in Argentina around the year 1500. The combination of extreme high-altitude cold and the intensely dry air created a perfect environment for preservation. Their bodies were freeze-dried, their skin leathery but intact, their facial expressions and even the intricate braids in their hair still visible. The frigid, thin air at over 20,000 feet above sea level prevented bacterial growth and desiccated the tissues, resulting in a level of preservation that rivals the most carefully prepared Egyptian mummies. This Andean phenomenon shows us how cold and aridity can work together, but it also involves a specific cultural context. These were deliberate, ritualistic placements in a sacred landscape, a human story intertwined with the environmental one. Then there is the captivating case of the so-called Ice Maiden, or Altai Princess, a Scythian noblewoman discovered in a burial mound on the remote Yukok Plateau in Siberia, near the borders of Russia, China, and Mongolia. She was not preserved in permafrost, but in a different kind of tomb, a log-lined chamber buried deep beneath the earth that subsequently filled with water and then froze solid, creating a sealed, icy sarcophagus. When archaeologists carefully thawed the burial site in 1993, they found a woman who had died nearly 2,500 years earlier, her skin covered in elaborate, blue-tinted tattoos of mythical animals. She was surrounded by a wealth of artifacts, including a headdress and a small pouch of cannabis, offering an intimate glimpse into her culture and status. Her preservation was a product of a unique accident. The water that flooded her tomb froze and never thawed, creating a stable, anaerobic, and frozen environment that protected her from the ravages of time. So where does our Moa Claw fit into this remarkable gallery of natural mummies? Its uniqueness becomes clear when we compare the key factors. Unlike the woolly mammoths, the Moa Claw was not preserved in permafrost. New Zealand's climate is temperate. Unlike the Inca children, it was not a product of high altitude, freezing arid conditions. The Mount Owen cave sits at a much more moderate elevation. And unlike the Altai Princess, its preservation wasn't aided by a man-made, waterlogged tomb that subsequently froze. The Moa Claw's survival is a testament to the power of a very specific, completely natural, and stable subterranean environment. The cave provided a consistent, cool temperature, a perfect balance of humidity for mummification, total darkness, and a protective mineral-rich coating, all without the need for extreme cold or human intervention. In terms of age, the claw is a fascinating middle ground. At 3,000 years old, it is significantly younger than the 40,000-year-old mammoths, but older than the 500-year-old Inca mummies. What truly sets it apart, however, is the species itself. Mammoths, Inca children, and the Altai princess are all mammals. The Moa Claw is a relic from a giant, flightless bird, a creature from an entirely different and much more fragile branch of the animal kingdom. Bird bones are famously hollow and delicate, and their soft tissues are typically quick to decompose. To find a bird's limb, complete with skin, muscle, and formidable talons, in such a phenomenal state after 3 millennia is an exceptionally rare event in the annals of paleontology. It stands as a powerful reminder that miracles of preservation can happen anywhere conditions are just right, even in a damp cave on a South Pacific island, offering us a direct and tangible touchstone to a lost world of avian giants. The moment of discovery in that dark chamber marked only the very beginning of the claw's modern journey, a delicate transition from a hidden relic to a protected national heirloom. The cavers, despite their astonishment, understood that this was not an object to be simply pried loose and carried out. Their immediate priority was to document the find in situ, taking photographs and notes to record its exact position and context within the sediment layers. This careful documentation is the unsung hero of archaeology, preserving the story of where an object was found, which is often just as important as the object itself. They then had to make the critical decision to leave it temporarily, returning to the surface to alert the proper authorities. This act of restraint, of leaving such a spectacular find behind in the darkness, speaks volumes about their respect for the scientific process. They knew that removing it improperly could destroy irreplaceable information or damage the claw itself, a risk they were not willing to take. Their report set in motion a chain of events that would bring professional archaeologists and conservators into the cave, equipped not with the simple tools of exploration, but with the delicate instruments of preservation. The extraction itself was a painstaking operation, more akin to a surgical procedure than a fossil hunt. The team that returned to the chamber worked with a meticulous slowness that belied their excitement. They weren't digging, they were excavating. Using small trowels, brushes, and even dental picks, they began to carefully clear the compacted sediment surrounding the leg bone and claw. Every handful of earth was sifted, just in case it contained a tiny fragment of bone, a lost talon, or other microscopic evidence. The goal was to free the specimen while keeping it encased in a protective block of its surrounding matrix, a technique that provides crucial support during transport. As the claw became looser, they likely applied consolidants, specialized glues, to any fragile areas, reinforcing the desiccated skin and tendons to prevent them from flaking apart. Finally, once it was fully exposed but still supported, they would have gently undercut it, lifted the entire block onto a rigid support, and wrapped it in protective materials like acid-free tissue and foam. This carefully packaged treasure was then transported out of the labyrinth, a slow and cautious procession through tight passages that had never before seen such a precious cargo. Its journey from the mountain's heart to its new, permanent home was handled with the utmost care. It would have been transported to a conservation laboratory, a controlled environment where temperature and humidity could be meticulously managed to prevent any further deterioration. Here, conservators began the detailed work of cleaning and stabilizing the find under microscope lighting. Using fine tools and gentle air pulsers, they removed the last traces of cave sediment, revealing the full glory of the scales, skin, and talons. This process is not about making the object look new. It's about halting decay and ensuring its long-term survival. Every step was documented in exhaustive detail, creating a permanent record for future researchers. After this painstaking preparation, the claw was ready for its final destination. the National Collection of the Museum of New Zealand, Te Papa Tongarewa in Wellington. Its arrival there was not merely an acquisition, it was a homecoming of sorts, a return of a lost piece of the nation's natural heritage to a place where it could be protected, studied, and shared. Today, the Mount Owen Moa Claw holds a place of honor within Te Papa, widely regarded as one of the museum's most iconic and significant taonga, or treasures. It isn't displayed as a simple curiosity tucked away in a corner. Instead, it is presented as a centerpiece, a tangible bridge to Aotearoa's unique and profound prehistory. The exhibit surrounding it is designed to do more than just show the object. It tells the complete story. Visitors can see the claw up close, marveling at the sheer scale of the talons and the startling preservation of the skin, often displayed alongside a reconstructed skeleton of a giant moa to provide a breathtaking sense of scale. Interpretive panels explain the biology of the moa, the ecology of the lost world it inhabited, and the cultural history of its relationship with people. The claw serves as the physical anchor for this entire narrative, the undeniable proof that makes the story of these giants feel immediate and real. It's the kind of object that makes children stop and stare, their imaginations ignited, and that causes adults to pause in quiet reflection on the fragility of life and the power of deep time. Beyond its public role, the claw's status as a foundational scientific specimen is immense. It is part of Te Papa's research collection, a living resource for scientists from around the world. Paleontologists continue to study its morphology, comparing it to other moa remains to better understand individual variation and species differences. The preserved soft tissues offer a rare opportunity for biochemical analysis that is impossible with fossilized bone alone. Researchers can investigate stable isotopes locked in the skin and claw keratin to learn more about the moa's diet and the ancient environment it lived in. In a more modern application, the claw has even contributed to genetic studies. While the Mount Owen Claw itself, being 3,000 years old, has presented challenges for full DNA sequencing, its existence has fueled the broader quest to understand the moa's genome from other, younger subfossils. It stands as a benchmark for preservation, a physical reminder of what is possible, and a catalyst for ongoing scientific inquiry. It is both a national treasure for the public to cherish and an irreplaceable key for scientists still unlocking the secrets of a lost world. The Mount Owen Moa Claw, safely housed within the controlled environment of the museum, became far more than a static display piece. It transformed into a dynamic scientific portal. Researchers now had an unprecedented opportunity to interrogate this relic using a suite of non-destructive and minimally invasive techniques that could unlock secrets hidden within its very fibers. The first and perhaps most tantalizing line of inquiry focused on the bird's genetic blueprint. While the claw's age of 3,000 years presented significant challenges for DNA recovery as genetic material degrades over time, the mere existence of such well-preserved tissues fueled broader efforts to sequence the moa genome from other, younger subfossils found across New Zealand. From these studies, scientists have pieced together a remarkable genetic family tree, confirming that the 9 species of moa evolved from a single ancestor that arrived in New Zealand millions of years ago. This genetic isolation led to some of the most rapid and extreme evolutionary changes ever documented in birds. The DNA revealed that the massive size disparity between males and females in the largest species, Dinornis, was the greatest of any bird, with females sometimes being twice the weight of males. This suggests they may have occupied slightly different ecological niches, perhaps feeding on different levels of the forest canopy to reduce competition, a sophisticated evolutionary strategy for coexistence written right into their genes. Beyond the code of life itself, the very substance of the claw offered a direct line into the daily life of this individual bird through a technique known as stable isotope analysis. This process is like taking a chemical snapshot of an animal's diet and environment. The principle is elegant. You are what you eat, and the isotopes of elements like carbon and nitrogen from your food become incorporated into your body's tissues, including your bones, skin, and claws. By taking a tiny, drilled sample from the claw's keratin or a sliver of the preserved bone, scientists can analyze the ratios of these isotopes. For the Mount Owen Moa, the isotopic signature told a clear story of a forest-dwelling browser. The carbon values pointed to a diet rich in the leaves, fruits, and twigs of trees and shrubs that grew beneath a closed forest canopy, not the open grasslands or scrubland. The nitrogen isotopes provided further nuance, helping to pinpoint its specific level in the food chain. As a dedicated herbivore, its nitrogen signature was distinct from what you would find in a carnivore or an omnivore. This data powerfully corroborates the fossil evidence and helps us paint a more vivid picture of this bird's life. It was a creature of the deep, shadowy woods, using its long neck to selectively forage from the lush, understory vegetation that thrived in the ancient, untouched ecosystems of Aotearoa long before widespread human settlement and deforestation. The physical architecture of the claw itself, even without any chemical analysis, serves as a powerful testament to the bird's lifestyle and capabilities. The formidable, curved talons made of thick keratin were not the weapons of a predator, but the multi-purpose tools of a giant. Their primary function was undoubtedly stability. Supporting a body mass of several hundred pounds requires a foot capable of distributing that weight and gripping the ground with immense force. The sharp points would have provided excellent traction on the often slippery, moss-covered forest floor. But these were also tools for interaction with the environment. A bird of this size would have used its powerful legs and feet for digging and rooting in the soil for tender roots, tubers, or fungi, much like a modern elephant or rhinoceros might use its feet. The claws could also have been used defensively. While generally peaceful, a cornered or threatened moa, especially one protecting a nest, could have delivered a kick with devastating force. A single, well-placed strike from a claw this size could have inflicted serious injury, potentially even deterring its only natural predator, the massive Haast's eagle. The structure of the foot, with its 3 forward-facing toes and 1 smaller rear toe, provided a broad, stable base perfectly adapted for a life spent walking and running across uneven terrain. This was not the delicate foot of a perching songbird, but the robust, powerful foundation of a terrestrial titan, engineered by evolution for power, stability, and survival. Each of these scientific techniques, genetics, isotope analysis, and biomechanical study, converges to create a multi-dimensional profile of the moa that transcends what we could learn from bones alone. The DNA reveals its deep evolutionary history and unique biology. The isotopes illuminate its daily meals and habitat preferences, and the claw's formidable structure shows us how it moved and interacted with its world. Together, they transform the Mount Owen Claw from a mysterious artifact into a richly detailed biography. It allows us to understand this individual not just as a specimen, but as a living, breathing part of a complex ecosystem. We can now picture it moving through the dappled light of the prehistoric forest, its powerful feet gripping the earth, its long neck reaching for leaves whose chemical signature it would eventually carry in its very claws, a creature fully adapted to and integrated within a world that, for a time, was perfectly in balance. This remarkable preservation, and the ongoing genetic insights we can glean from it, naturally leads to one of the most exciting and provocative questions in modern science. Given what we know, could we actually bring the moa back? The concept of de-extinction, of resurrecting a lost species, has moved from the pages of science fiction into serious laboratories, and the moa, with its relatively recent disappearance and available genetic material, often finds itself at the center of this conversation. The theoretical roadmap for such an endeavor does exist, and it largely follows the same path scientists are exploring for the woolly mammoth. The first and most critical step would be to sequence the moa's entire genome with the highest possible accuracy. While we have a good genetic map from various bone fragments, the DNA in these subfossils is shattered into billions of tiny pieces, like a book dropped and its pages scattered to the wind. The challenge is to assemble these fragments correctly, using the genome of a close living relative as a guide, to create a complete, digital blueprint of the moa's genetic code. Once you have that blueprint, the next, and far more complex, step is to bring it to life. The proposed method would involve gene editing on a colossal scale. Scientists would take a living cell from the closest living relative of the moa, which, based on evolutionary studies, is likely the tinamou, a small, flighted bird from South America, or perhaps a larger, more physiologically similar ratite, like an ostrich or an emu. Using powerful tools like CRISPR, they would then systematically edit the DNA of this living cell, changing it piece by piece to match the sequenced Moa genome. This is not a simple cut-and-paste job. It would involve altering millions of individual base pairs, a task of unimaginable complexity and precision. If successful, this edited cell, now carrying a Moa genome, would then be used in a process called somatic cell nuclear transfer, the same technique used to create Dolly the sheep. The nucleus of this engineered cell would be inserted into an egg cell from the surrogate species that has had its own nucleus removed. A tiny jolt of electricity could then trigger the egg to begin dividing, forming an embryo. This embryo would then be implanted into the surrogate bird, hopefully leading to a pregnancy and, ultimately, the birth of a bird that hasn't walked the earth for 500 years. However, the sheer scale of the biological obstacles here is staggering. The degraded state of ancient DNA is the first and perhaps most formidable barrier. Even in the best preserved Moa bones, the DNA strands are extremely short and contaminated with genetic material from bacteria and fungi. Reconstructing a perfect, error-free genome from this mosaic of decay is currently beyond our technical capabilities. Furthermore, the process of gestation itself presents a monumental challenge. A female ostrich or emu would be the logical surrogate, but could its body successfully carry a Moa embryo to term? The physiological differences, the incubation period, the nutritional needs of the developing chick, all of these are complete unknowns. The resulting animal might survive, but it could also suffer from a host of developmental issues. A creature caught between two worlds, neither truly Moa nor truly its surrogate parent. The technical hurdles are not just difficult, they represent a frontier of science that we have only just begun to approach. Beyond the laboratory manuals and the Petri dishes, the debate around extinction ventures into much deeper, more philosophical territory. Proponents argue passionately for the concept of restorative justice. They contend that since humanity was the direct cause of the Moa's extinction, we have a moral obligation to correct that wrong if the technology becomes available. They paint a picture of a rewilded New Zealand, where vast tracts of protected land could once again be home to its lost ecological giant. The return of the Moa, they suggest, could help restore lost ecological functions, like seed dispersal for native plants that may have co-evolved with the bird, potentially strengthening the entire ecosystem. It would be a powerful symbol of hope and a testament to humanity's ability not just to destroy, but to heal and restore. Yet, critics raise equally powerful and sobering concerns. They question whether such a project is a responsible use of vast financial and scientific resources, pointing out that the millions of dollars required could instead be used to protect the countless species currently teetering on the brink of extinction today. There is also the profound ethical question of the animal's welfare. What kind of life would a resurrected Moa have? It would be a living anachronism, born into a world that is utterly foreign. Its native forests are greatly reduced. Its ecological partners like the Haast's eagle are gone, and it would face modern threats like diseases to which it has no immunity. Would creating such a creature be an act of conservation or one of profound cruelty? Furthermore, the very definition of bringing a species back is called into question. Even if we could produce an animal that is genetically identical to a Moa, its behavior, its cultural knowledge of migration routes, foraging spots, and social structures, all learned from its parents over millennia, would be lost forever. We could create the shell of a Moa, but could we ever truly restore its soul? The debate forces us to confront what we truly value about a species. Is it merely the sum of its genes, or is it the unique and irreplaceable role it played in a living, breathing ecosystem that is now gone? The story of the Mount Owen Claw gives us a tangible link to the past, but it also serves as a powerful reminder of the immense and permanent responsibility that comes with the power to alter life itself. This astonishing relic hasn't remained confined to the halls of science. It has burst into the public consciousness, becoming a modern icon that bridges the gap between academic discovery and popular myth. One of its most powerful avenues into our collective imagination has been through the lens of documentary filmmaking. The story of the Mount Owen Moa Claw has all the elements of a perfect documentary narrative: a dramatic discovery in a dark, unexplored place, a mysterious and long-lost creature, and a puzzle that defies conventional science. Films produced by major networks like National Geographic and the BBC have brought this story to life for millions of viewers worldwide. Through stunning cinematography, we are taken back into that silent cave, our screens illuminated by the same headlamp beams that first fell upon the claw. We see careful reenactments of the moment of discovery, the tense excitement of the extraction, and the awe on the faces of scientists as they examine the specimen under bright lights. These documentaries do more than just inform. They create an emotional connection. They transform the claw from a scientific specimen into a character in a real-life adventure story, allowing a global audience to experience that same shiver of wonder, that feeling of touching a past that feels impossibly close. This widespread media coverage cemented the claw's status not just as an important find, but as one of the great natural history discoveries of the 20th century. This leap into the public eye inevitably stirred deeper, more speculative currents of thought, particularly within the world of cryptozoology, the search for animals whose existence is not yet recognized by mainstream science. The claw's incredibly fresh appearance, looking as if it belonged to a bird that had died only weeks or months before, naturally fueled a tantalizing and persistent rumor. What if the moa isn't actually extinct? The logic, though scientifically tenuous, is emotionally compelling. If a claw can remain so perfectly preserved for 3,000 years, could a small, relict population of these giants have survived in the vast, remote wilderness of New Zealand's South Island? The Fiordland region, with its nearly impenetrable forests, deep, isolated valleys, and sheer mountain faces, is often cited as the most likely refuge. For decades, reports have surfaced from trampers, hunters, and pilots of fleeting glimpses of enormous, gray-brown birds moving through the mist-shrouded beech forests, far too large to be any known species. These anecdotal sightings, while never supported by any physical evidence like photographs, droppings, or feathers, keep the legend alive. The existence of the Mount Owen Claw acts as a kind of psychological anchor for these beliefs. It provides a tangible piece of proof that moa were real, and that their remains can look deceptively recent, giving hopefuls a legitimate artifact to point to while they scan the map for any blank spot where a secret might still hide. This cultural journey from scientific specimen to potential living mystery is a fascinating phenomenon in its own right. The human psyche seems hardwired to hope that not all the world's giants are gone. The idea that a creature from a lost world could still be walking the earth today taps into a profound sense of wonder and a longing for a planet that still holds major surprises. The moa, in this context, joins other legendary cryptids like Scotland's Loch Ness Monster or the Himalayan Yeti, but with one crucial difference: we have absolute, irrefutable proof that the moa did exist, and recently enough that its memory is preserved in human culture. This blurring of the line between confirmed extinction and rumored survival is what gives the moa legend its unique power. The claw sits right at the center of this blur, a genuine article that fuels speculative fire. It challenges our certainty, reminding us that our understanding of the natural world is based on the evidence we have found, and that the vast, trackless wilds can still nurture beautiful, if unproven, possibilities. Beyond the realm of myth and mystery, the claw has taken on a much more serious and poignant role within New Zealand itself. It has become a potent national symbol for conservation and the profound fragility of life. In a country that has experienced one of the highest rates of faunal extinction since human arrival, the moa stands as the ultimate emblem of loss. The claw is a physical, visceral reminder of this legacy. It is not an abstract concept or a drawing in a textbook. It is the actual flesh and bone of a creature that was driven into oblivion. Environmental groups and government agencies like the Department of Conservation frequently use the image of the moa in campaigns to protect the country's remaining unique species, such as the critically endangered kakapo parrot or the little spotted kiwi. The message is clear and powerful: we lost the moa, We must not lose this. The claw embodies the finality of extinction. It represents a broken thread in the ecosystem, a silence in the forest that can never be filled. When people see it on display at Te Papa, they aren't just looking at a cool old bone. They are confronting a consequence. It sparks a necessary and uncomfortable reflection on humanity's role as a force of change, challenging us to consider our responsibility to the unique and vulnerable life that remains. This symbolic power extends into the very identity of New Zealand as a nation. The story of the moa is a foundational part of the country's natural history, a narrative that is taught in schools and understood by every citizen. The claw, as the most perfectly preserved remnant of that story, serves as a touchstone for this shared heritage. It represents a deep-time connection to the land, a reminder of the incredible evolutionary drama that played out in isolation for 80 million years. It's a symbol of what makes Aotearoa unique, a land that produced such strange and magnificent creatures. At the same time, it is a somber memorial to a past that was irrevocably altered. This dual identity as an icon of both national pride and national reflection gives the claw a cultural weight that few other museum objects possess. It connects the achievements of Polynesian explorers and the tragedy of extinction with the modern conservation ethos that is now a core part of the country's character. The claw is a lesson carved in skin and keratin, a permanent exhibit in the Museum of Human Impact, urging us to look back so that we might better protect what lies ahead. And so, while we've pieced together an incredible narrative from the bones and the legends, the story of the moa is far from a closed book. The discovery of the Mount Owen Claw didn't just provide answers. It opened up a whole new frontier of tantalizing and unresolved questions that continue to challenge scientists and captivate our imaginations. One of the most persistent and haunting mysteries revolves around the possibility of holdouts. Could small, isolated groups of these giants have clung to survival in the most remote and inaccessible corners of the South Island long after their widespread extinction was declared? The official scientific record, based on radiocarbon dating of the most recent bone deposits, suggests the last moa died out by the mid-15th century. Yet, the sheer ruggedness of Fiordland's wilderness, with its labyrinthine valleys and dense, misty forests that even today remain largely untracked, leaves a tiny window of possibility ajar. There are scattered, unverified reports from the 19th and even early 20th century stories from gold prospectors and bushmen of encountering enormous, strange birds that didn't match any known species. While these anecdotes are dismissed by most scientists as misidentifications of large emus or even deer in poor light, they persist in the cultural memory, fueled by that very human desire for the world to still hold secrets. The idea of a relict population surviving for an extra century or two in a hidden valley is not completely implausible from an ecological standpoint, but it remains in the realm of compelling speculation without a single piece of irrefutable physical evidence to tip the scales. This leads directly into another profound uncertainty: the precise chronology of their final days. We know the broad strokes of the extinction event, but the fine-grained timeline remains frustratingly blurred. Was it a single, catastrophic collapse that swept across both islands within a generation, or was it a slower, more staggered retreat, with some species or island populations holding out longer than others? The Blitzkrieg model presents a clean, dramatic end, but the archaeological evidence can be patchy. Could the smaller, more elusive bush moa species, adapted to dense, rugged terrain, have endured for a few more decades after their larger, lowland cousins were gone? The challenge is that the very last bone of the very last moa has almost certainly not been found. Each new radiocarbon date from a moa bone found in an archaeological site refines our understanding, but it only gives us the date that specific individual died, not the date of the entire species expiration. Pinpointing the exact sequence of events, the order in which each of the 9 species blinked out, and the final strongholds where they made their last stand, is a complex historical detective story where many of the clues have been lost to time, erosion, and the dense, covering growth of the New Zealand bush. Beyond the questions of timing and survival, there is the thrilling prospect of what else might be waiting in the darkness. The Mount Owen Claw was a revelation precisely because its level of preservation was considered virtually impossible. Its existence fundamentally rewrote the rules of what can survive. This forces us to ask, was it a complete one-off, a perfect fluke of nature, or is it merely the first example of its kind? The cave systems of New Zealand are vast and still largely unexplored. Could there be other chambers, other sediment traps, that have acted as similar natural time capsules, safeguarding even more complete specimens? The possibility is electrifying. Imagine a cave that sheltered an entire moa, its body mummified by the same perfect conditions, preserving not just a claw, but its head with skin and beak intact, or even traces of its last meal in its stomach. Such a find would be the paleontological equivalent of discovering a new Rosetta Stone, offering unprecedented insights into the bird's soft tissue anatomy, its coloration, and its physiology. The search for such a specimen drives ongoing speleological surveys, a quiet, dedicated effort to push deeper into the karst landscapes, knowing that the next beam of a headlamp could illuminate another miracle of preservation that further transforms our understanding of these lost giants. These unanswered questions are not merely academic exercises, they are the very engine of scientific inquiry and public fascination. They remind us that history, even natural history, is not a static set of facts, but a dynamic field of investigation. The mystery of the moa's final moments and the potential for future discoveries keep the story alive and evolving. They invite us to look at the map of New Zealand not as a known quantity, but as a landscape that may still be hiding profound secrets in its silent, subterranean vaults and its most isolated valleys. This sense of unfinished business ensures that the moa is not just a relic of the past, but a continuing presence, a ghost that still haunts the land, compelling us to keep looking, keep questioning, and keep wondering what other wonders the Earth has yet to yield. The story of the moa is more than a captivating historical mystery. It is a foundational lesson in conservation, a stark reminder etched in bone and claw of the profound and permanent consequences of our actions on the natural world. This single extinction event, the loss of 9 unique bird species in a geological instant, serves as a sobering preview of the global biodiversity crisis we are navigating today. The parallels are both haunting and instructive. Just as the first Polynesian settlers encountered an ecosystem that had never known a terrestrial mammal predator, modern humanity often enters new environments or exploits existing ones with a similar lack of foresight, viewing resources as infinite and resilient when they are, in reality, deeply fragile and interconnected. The moa's disappearance demonstrates a recurring pattern, a novel pressure, whether it be a new hunting technology, habitat alteration, or the introduction of invasive species, can trigger a cascade of collapse that is breathtakingly swift and utterly irreversible. The silence that fell over the forests of New Zealand is a silence we risk repeating in ecosystems across the globe, from the rainforests of the Amazon to the coral reefs of the Pacific. This sobering legacy has become the genetic code of modern conservation in New Zealand, transforming the nation into a world leader in proactive species protection. The memory of the moa functions as a powerful never-again narrative, fueling an ambitious and often radical approach to safeguarding what remains. The most powerful embodiment of this is the concept of predator-free sanctuaries. Understanding that introduced rats, stoats, and possums play the same devastating role today that the Kior rat did centuries ago, preying on eggs and chicks of flightless birds, New Zealand has invested heavily in creating fortified arcs. Places like Zealandia in Wellington or Sanctuary Mountain Mongatatari are surrounded by immense, specialized fencing that creates a mainland island, a safe haven from which introduced mammals have been completely eradicated. Within these fences, critically endangered birds like the kakapo, the taika, and the kiwi can breed and thrive, safe from the pressures that wiped out their larger relatives. This isn't just conservation, it is an act of ecological redemption, a direct and deliberate effort to rewrite the tragic ending of the moa's story for other unique species. The philosophy extends far beyond fenced sanctuaries to encompass entire islands and, increasingly, the mainland itself through the ambitious Predator-Free 2050 initiative. This national goal aims to eradicate the most damaging introduced predators from the entire country by the year 2050. It is a monumental undertaking, a moonshot for conservation that draws its moral urgency directly from the nation's history of loss. The logic is powerfully simple. If we can remove the primary threat, we can give the remaining native fauna a fighting chance to recover. The technology being deployed is a modern echo of the sophisticated trapping methods used by early Maori, but on a grand, high-tech scale. Self-resetting traps, biodegradable poisons, and sophisticated monitoring networks using drones and satellite data are all part of this grand campaign. The driving force behind this immense effort is the understanding, hard-won from the moa's extinction, that waiting until a species is on the very brink of disappearance is a recipe for failure. Proactive, aggressive intervention is the only way to prevent another irreversible loss. This paradigm shift, from documenting loss to preventing it, is perhaps the moa's greatest gift to the modern world. The story forces us to move beyond a mindset of simple resource extraction and confront the concept of ecological interdependence. The moa wasn't just a bird, it was a keystone species, a vital cog in the machinery of its ecosystem. Its browsing shaped the forest structure, its movements cleared paths, and its droppings dispersed seeds. Its removal didn't just create an empty niche, it fundamentally altered the functioning of the entire environment, contributing to the decline of other species and the plants that relied on it. This understanding is now central to conservation biology everywhere. We no longer just save individual species in isolation. We strive to protect and restore entire ecosystems, recognizing that the health of the whole is dependent on the complex web of relationships between its parts. The loss of a single pollinator, a key predator, or a major herbivore can send shockwaves through the system, just as the fall of the moa brought down the Haast's eagle. Ultimately, the claw from Mount Owen is a tangible touchstone for this entire philosophy. It is not merely a museum piece, it is a physical covenant, a promise we have made to the future. When visitors, especially children, press their noses against the glass at Te Papa and stare in wonder at those formidable talons, they are not just learning about a strange, extinct bird. They are being presented with a choice. The claw asks a silent, powerful question. Will we be the generation that allows more unique voices to be permanently silenced, or will we learn from the past and become the stewards that the moa never had? Its preservation is a miracle of nature, but its meaning is a challenge to humanity. It reminds us that extinction is the one environmental problem that is truly forever. A door that, once closed, can never be reopened. In its leathery skin and sharp, enduring points, we find both a memorial for what was lost and the unwavering inspiration to protect the irreplaceable wonder that remains. To truly appreciate this bird, we have to move beyond its sheer scale and delve into the brilliant mechanical design that allowed it to thrive, a blueprint for life written not in stone, but in bone and sinew. The moa's skeleton is a masterclass in evolutionary adaptation, a framework perfectly engineered for a life spent entirely on the ground. Unlike most birds, whose skeletons are a delicate compromise between the needs of flight and terrestrial life, the moa's bones were liberated from the constraints of the air. The most obvious and astonishing absence is, of course, the wings. In every other bird, from a tiny hummingbird to a flightless ostrich, you will find at least a vestigial wing bone, a remnant of their flying ancestors. But the moa took this evolutionary commitment to its ultimate conclusion. Through millions of years of isolation, the wing bones vanished completely. Their shoulder girdle, the structure that in other birds anchors the powerful flight muscles, was drastically reduced. This wasn't a bird that couldn't fly. This was a bird whose very architecture declared that flight was a forgotten memory, an evolutionary path so thoroughly abandoned that not even a trace remained. This freedom from flight allowed all of the bird's structural resources to be poured into its legs, which became the true powerhouses of its body. The leg bones of a giant moa were monumental structures. The femur, or thigh bone, was incredibly robust, and the tibia tarsus, the equivalent of our shin bone, was a massive, dense pillar designed to bear immense weight. These were not the slender, lightweight bones of a heron or crane. They were the avian equivalent of the columns holding up a cathedral, built for stability and power rather than speed. The pelvis, the anchor point for these mighty legs, was exceptionally broad and deep, providing a vast area for the attachment of some of the largest and most powerful muscles in the animal kingdom. These muscles, working in concert with the formidable tendons preserved in the Mount Owen Claw, transformed the moa's legs into potent engines for locomotion and defense. A single, powerful kick from a bird weighing several hundred pounds, driven by this immense muscular system and ending in those sharp talons, would have been a devastating blow. It could have been used to deter the host's eagle, to establish dominance within a group, or even to dig for roots and tubers buried in the forest floor. This was a creature whose primary power and security came not from taking to the skies, but from its unshakable connection to the earth. While its legs provided the foundation, the moa's long, serpentine neck was its precision instrument for survival. The neck vertebrae were numerous and highly flexible, allowing the bird to raise its head high into the forest canopy, or lower it to browse on ferns at its feet, without needing to move its entire cumbersome body. This adaptability was key to its success as a browser. It could stand in one spot and efficiently strip leaves from a wide radius, conserving precious energy. The structure of the skull itself tells us a great deal about its diet. The moa's head was surprisingly small relative to its body, and it lacked a true, heavy beak like that of a parrot or an eagle. Instead, its mouth was more like a tough, sharp-edged pair of shears. The upper jaw had a pointed, keratinous tip perfect for plucking leaves and twigs, and its jaw muscles were arranged in a way that allowed a strong, scissoring action. It wouldn't bite or tear its food. It would neatly snip off vegetation. This design points to a diet of relatively soft, fibrous plant matter, leaves, berries, and shoots which it would gather in large quantities to fuel its massive frame. All of that plant material, however, presents a significant digestive challenge. Cellulose, the tough structural component of plant cell walls, is incredibly difficult to break down. Mammals like cows and deer have complex, multi-chambered stomachs and rely on gut bacteria to ferment their food over a long period. Birds, with their need for a lightweight body plan, evolved a different, more mechanical solution, the gizzard. This is a specialized, muscular part of the stomach that acts like a natural food processor. The moa's gizzard would have been an immensely powerful organ. It would swallow its food whole, and the gizzard, with its thick, muscular walls, would rhythmically contract, grinding the plant matter into a digestible pulp. But muscle alone isn't enough to pulverize tough leaves and twigs. This is where one of the most fascinating pieces of moa evidence comes into play: gizzard stones, or gastroliths. Paleontologists frequently find piles of smooth, rounded stones associated with moa skeletons, often concentrated in the abdominal area where the gizzard was located. The moa would deliberately seek out and swallow these stones, which would tumble around inside the gizzard with the food, providing the abrasive grit needed to smash the plant fibers apart. Over time, the stones themselves would become worn smooth and would eventually be regurgitated or passed, to be replaced by new, sharper stones. The presence of these gastroliths provides us with direct, physical proof of the moa's herbivorous diet and its sophisticated digestive strategy, a clever internal mill that allowed it to unlock the energy stored within the ancient forests it called home. The incredible find in the Mount Owen cave wasn't the final chapter in this story, but rather the opening of a thrilling new era of exploration. That single claw, emerging from the darkness in such a pristine state, fundamentally rewrote the playbook for New Zealand paleontology. It proved that conditions existed beneath the islands where the impossible became possible, transforming every unexplored cave passage and sediment deposit from a simple geological feature into a potential time capsule. This realization has fueled a persistent, ongoing quest, a dedication within the scientific and caving communities to return to the underworld, driven by the electrifying possibility that other chambers hold secrets just as profound, if not more so. The work today is systematic and technologically advanced, a far cry from the chance encounter of 1987. Modern expeditions into cave systems like those in the Waitomo region or the remote depths of Fiordlands national parks are meticulously planned missions. Researchers now use ground-penetrating radar to map sediment layers behind cave walls and laser scanners to create three-dimensional digital models of entire caverns, allowing them to identify promising excavation sites without disturbing a single stone. They are not just looking for bones. They are hunting for the specific environmental contexts that lead to miracles of preservation, the silent, cold, and stable chambers where time itself seems to have paused. This renewed focus has already yielded other remarkable discoveries that build upon the legacy of Mount Owen. In the vast honeycomb of caves beneath the Waitomo district, teams have uncovered complete, articulated moa skeletons, their bones found in perfect anatomical position as if the birds had simply lain down to rest. These finds are invaluable because they provide a complete picture of the animal's structure, allowing for more accurate reconstructions of their posture and gait. Elsewhere, in dry rock shelters in the South Island Central Otago region, the arid climate has preserved a different kind of treasure, desiccated moa droppings, known as coprolites. While it might sound unglamorous, this material is a scientific goldmine. By dissolving these ancient droppings and analyzing their contents, researchers can identify the specific plants, seeds, and even pollen grains the moa consumed, offering an unprecedented window into their diet and the precise makeup of the prehistoric forests they inhabited. Each of these finds, from a complete skeleton to a pile of gizzard stones or a piece of preserved skin, adds another crucial piece to the puzzle. They collectively prove that the Mount Owen Claw was not a solitary anomaly, but rather the most spectacular example of a broader phenomenon of preservation occurring across New Zealand's unique karst landscapes. Every new discovery validates the ongoing search and sharpens the focus on where to look next. The ultimate goal, the holy grail that drives cavers and scientists to squeeze through one more tight passage, is the prospect of finding a specimen that surpasses even the Mount Owen Claw. The dream is to one day shine a headlamp into a chamber and discover a fully mummified moa, a complete bird with its skin, feathers, and soft tissues intact. Imagine the scientific revelations such a find would unlock. We could finally know the exact color and patterning of its plumage, resolving debates about whether it was camouflaged for the forest or had more vibrant markings. We could study the structure of its muscles and internal organs in minute detail, understanding its physiology and metabolism. Critically, a complete mummy might even preserve ancient DNA in a far less degraded state, potentially allowing for a near-complete genomic sequence. The discovery of such a specimen would be a watershed moment, catapulting our understanding of these avian giants from informed reconstruction into the realm of direct observation. It's this potential, this chance to pull back the curtain completely on a lost world, that keeps the expeditions funded and the researchers descending, year after year, into the cool, silent dark, forever hoping that the next beam of light will fall upon another miracle waiting patiently in the earth. This geographical division created a fascinating natural experiment, where the two main islands of New Zealand functioned almost as separate evolutionary laboratories. The sprawling, mountainous terrain of the South Island, with its vast swaths of dense, cold-temperature forests and expansive alpine herb fields, became the exclusive domain of the true titans. Here, the two species of giant moa, Dinornis robustus and Dinornis novaezelandii, reached their most colossal proportions. The females of these species, in particular, evolved to become the largest birds ever to walk the earth, their immense size likely an adaptation to the cooler climate and the need to process large quantities of lower-quality vegetation. They were the mega herbivores of the southern landscapes, their long necks allowing them to browse from tall trees in the lowland forests, and their powerful legs carrying them across the open, tussock-covered valleys. Sharing this southern realm were other hefty species like the heavy-footed moa, a robust bird with notably sturdy leg bones, well-suited for navigating rugged, steep terrain. The South Island was essentially the kingdom of the giants, a world where avian life had pushed the boundaries of scale to its absolute limits. In contrast, the warmer, more volcanic North Island supported a different, though no less remarkable, cast of characters. While it was home to a smaller species of giant moa, the North Island's moa community was characterized by greater diversity and specialization among the medium and smaller-bodied species. The North Island's forests were generally denser and more subtropical, creating a complex, multi-layered environment. This fostered the evolution of species like the elegant eastern moa, a more gracile browser with a delicate build, perfectly adapted for picking its way through thick undergrowth in search of choice ferns and shrubs. Another key resident was the stout-legged moa, a bird that, as its name implies, had particularly powerful lower legs and feet. This unique anatomy suggests it may have been a more generalist feeder, perhaps using its strength to dig for roots and tubers in the fertile North Island soils, or to push through particularly dense thickets. This variety highlights a key principle of ecology. In the South Island, evolution tended toward sheer size and dominance, while in the North, it favored a finer partitioning of resources, with different species carving out more specialized niches within the same forest canopy. The reasons behind this stark north-south divide are rooted in the very geology and climate of New Zealand itself. The Southern Alps, a massive mountain chain running like a spine down the South Island, create a profound rain shadow. The western side of the island is drenched by prevailing winds, supporting lush, wet rainforests, while the eastern side is significantly drier, with open woodlands, grasslands, and scrub. This diversity of habitats within a single island provided a wider range of ecological opportunities, likely driving the evolution of the larger, more generalized browsers that could exploit different areas seasonally. The colder temperatures of the south also play a role according to a biological principle known as Bergmann's rule, which observes that within a widespread group of animals, populations and species tend to be larger in colder environments. A larger body has a smaller surface area relative to its volume, which helps to conserve heat more efficiently, a distinct advantage in the chilly winters of the South Island high country. The North Island, with its more uniformly temperate warm climate and less extreme topography, did not exert the same pressures for gigantism, allowing for a radiation of forms that were more about finesse and specialization than raw, overwhelming scale. Understanding this distribution completely transforms the story of human arrival and its catastrophic impact. When the first Polynesian canoes made landfall, primarily in the more accessible and climatically hospitable North Island, the initial wave of hunting would have focused on the moa species present there. The archaeological record confirms this, with massive butchering sites found in places like the Werau Bar. However, as these local populations were rapidly depleted, a pattern of resource exploitation began to unfold. Hunting parties, equipped with sophisticated knowledge, would have begun making deliberate voyages across the turbulent Cook Strait to access the untapped moa populations of the South Island. Imagine the scene: these explorers arriving on the shores of the Marlborough Sounds or the Canterbury coast and pushing inland, where they would have encountered a sight unlike anything they had seen before: flocks of birds that stood twice the height of a person. The incentive for this cross-strait expedition would have been enormous. A single giant moa from the South Island could yield more meat than several of the smaller North Island species combined. This targeted exploitation created a pincer movement of extinction, with pressure coming from both the initial settlements in the north and the newly established seasonal camps in the south, relentlessly squeezing the moa populations from multiple directions until, one by one, across both islands, their distinct calls fell silent forever. While the evidence for human-driven extinction is powerful and compelling, science thrives on questioning the dominant narrative, and a closer look at the timeline reveals a fascinating complication that has fueled an alternative theory. What if the arrival of humans was not the sole cause, but the final, decisive blow to a dynasty that was already teetering on the brink? This possibility forces us to widen our lens and consider another powerful force of nature: climate change. The Holocene epoch, the geological period we are still in today, is often mistakenly thought of as a time of climatic stability, but the truth is far more dynamic. Following the last ice age, the planet underwent significant fluctuations, and New Zealand was no exception. Between around 3,700 years ago, just before the first waka arrived, the region experienced a period known as the Holocene climatic optimum. This was a time of generally warmer and drier conditions than today. For the lush, temperate forests the moa depended on, this shift was not trivial. Warmer temperatures could have altered growth patterns for key food plants, and drier conditions may have led to increased forest fires, even without human intervention, subtly reducing and fragmenting the moa's ideal habitat. The question is not whether the climate changed; it undoubtedly did, but whether that change was significant enough to push these robust, long-evolved birds into a state of decline. Proponents of this climate stress theory point to several indirect lines of evidence. Pollen records extracted from lake and swamp sediments act as a natural archive of ancient plant life. These cores show notable shifts in forest composition during the Holocene. In some regions, there was a slow decline in the pollen of certain tree species that were likely key food sources for moa, such as the tall podocarps, alongside an increase in grasses and shrubs that thrive in drier, more open conditions. This suggests the dense, continuous canopy that giant browsers like the mower relied upon was already becoming patchier in some areas. A more open forest might support fewer of these massive birds per square mile. Furthermore, a changing climate doesn't just affect plants, it can alter the entire ecosystem. Warmer, drier conditions can impact the breeding cycles of insects, which in turn affects the smaller birds that share the forest. For the moa, a specialist feeder, any reduction in the quality or availability of its preferred foods could have had a cascading effect. Lower nutritional intake could lead to reduced fertility, slower growth rates for chicks, or increased susceptibility to disease. The population wouldn't necessarily crash overnight, but it could enter a long, slow contraction, becoming more vulnerable and less resilient to a new, sudden shock. However, this theory faces a formidable and evidence-based challenge from the primary school of thought. Skeptics of a major climate role argue that while the climate did shift, the moa had successfully weathered far more dramatic changes in the distant past. During the intense glacial cycles of the Pleistocene, just before the Holocene, massive ice sheets advanced and retreated across the South Island, forcing entire ecosystems to migrate. The ancestors of the moa survived these profound upheavals, adapting to wildly different conditions by moving to refuges and evolving into the diverse forms that greeted humanity. The Holocene fluctuations were mild by comparison. If the moa could endure ice ages, could a slightly warmer and drier period truly threaten them? The most powerful counter-argument, however, comes from the moa themselves. If climate change was the primary driver stressing their populations, we would expect to see a gradual, centuries-long decline in their numbers reflected in the fossil record. Instead, the archaeological and paleontological data paints a starkly different picture. The vast bone deposits in early archaeological sites show healthy, robust populations right up to the point of human contact. There is no evidence of widespread malnutrition or a slow dwindling of numbers in the centuries immediately preceding human arrival. The moa bones from that time show animals in their prime, not a species in a protracted crisis. This brings us to a potential middle ground, a synthesis that many modern paleoecologists find most convincing: the synergistic extinction model. In this view, it wasn't a case of climate or humans, but climate and humans. Imagine a moa population that was, at most, mildly stressed by climatic shifts. Perhaps their ranges had contracted slightly at the margins, or certain subpopulations were a bit more fragile than before. They were in no immediate danger of extinction, but their buffer against catastrophe had been slightly reduced. Then, a novel, intelligent predator arrived with devastating efficiency. The combination of the two pressures, a background level of environmental stress, and the foreground onslaught of hunting and habitat burning, created a perfect storm that neither pressure could have achieved alone. The climate shifts may have made the moa marginally more vulnerable, while human exploitation provided the overwhelming, decisive force that pushed them over the edge. This model helps explain the astonishing speed of the extinction. A perfectly healthy, robust population might have withstood the initial hunting pressure for longer, perhaps allowing some remote groups to adapt or survive. A population already facing subtle environmental headwinds, however, would have had less resilience, collapsing with a speed and finality that still shocks us today. Ultimately, the climate change theory, while unable to stand alone as the sole explanation, adds a crucial layer of complexity to our understanding. It moves the narrative away from a simple story of a pristine paradise shattered by human arrival, and toward a more nuanced view of a dynamic world where multiple forces can converge with tragic consequences. It reminds us that ecosystems are not static, but are constantly in flux, and that a species' fate can be sealed by the intersection of long-term natural trends and short-term human actions. The Moa were not necessarily a doomed species when the first canoes landed, but they may have been, in ecological terms, a kingdom whose walls had already been subtly weakened, making them unable to withstand the siege that was to come. This perspective doesn't lessen human responsibility. If anything, it deepens it, showing how our impact can be the final, critical variable that tips a delicate balance into irreversible collapse. Yet, having survived for millennia in its perfect cave sanctuary, the Claw now faces a new and paradoxical threat: exposure to the modern world it was brought into. The very air we breathe, the light we live by, and the microscopic life that surrounds us are all agents of decay that the specimen was miraculously shielded from for 3,000 years. The moment it left the stable, cold and dark environment of the Mount Owen cave, a biological clock that had been frozen started ticking once more. The single greatest danger is oxidation, the same process that causes an apple to turn brown or a piece of iron to rust. For the claw's delicate organic tissues, exposure to oxygen in the atmosphere can cause irreversible chemical changes. The proteins in the desiccated skin and muscles can cross-link and become brittle, while the lipids, or fats, within the tissues can break down and form acidic compounds that slowly eat away at the specimen from the inside out. Even the slightest fluctuation in humidity can be catastrophic. If the air becomes too dry, these already ancient and fragile tissues could desiccate further, cracking and crumbling into dust. If it becomes too humid, even for a short period, it could invite a bloom of mold or bacteria that would feast on the very material that has defied time for so long. To combat these invisible threats, the museum conservators at Te Papa Tongaire will wage a silent, meticulous war, treating the claw not as a dead artifact, but as a patient in a state of perpetual, delicate health. The first line of defense is its home within the museum's collection storage, a specially engineered environment that meticulously replicates the stability of its original cave. The claw resides in a sealed, climate-controlled display case or storage unit where temperature and relative humidity are constantly monitored and maintained within a very narrow, safe range. The lighting is another critical factor. Prolonged exposure to light, especially the ultraviolet wavelengths present in sunlight and even in standard museum display lights, is incredibly damaging. It acts like a slow-acting bleach, breaking down organic molecules and causing fading and embrittlement. Therefore, the claw is kept in near-total darkness when not actively being studied or viewed by the public, and when it is on display, it is illuminated only by special low UV LED lights for strictly limited periods. This controlled environment is the claw's new artificial cave, a high-tech sanctuary designed to put the genie of decay back into its bottle and suspend time once more. The work of a conservator, however, goes far beyond simply placing the object in a box. Theirs is a discipline of profound patience and microscopic precision, often described as a cross between a scientist, a doctor, and an artist. Their first task is ongoing monitoring. Using magnifying glasses and microscopes, they regularly perform detailed visual inspections of the claw, looking for the earliest possible signs of change: a new, almost invisible hairline crack in the skin, a slight lightening in color, a tiny speck of potential mold growth. They might take high-resolution photographs of specific areas over time to create a visual baseline, allowing them to detect subtle shifts that would be impossible to see with the naked eye. When intervention is necessary, it is always minimal and reversible. A conservator would never use a strong, permanent glue. Instead, they might apply a tiny amount of a specially formulated consolidant, a weak, reversible adhesive, to stabilize a flaking piece of skin, essentially re-adhering it to the bone beneath. If a new crack appears, they might gently inject a compatible, flexible filler to prevent it from propagating further. Every action is documented in exhaustive detail, creating a medical chart for the specimen that will guide the conservators of the future. ensuring that the story of its preservation is as carefully recorded as the story of its discovery. This painstaking work is driven by a philosophy that looks far beyond the present day. The conservators at Te Papa are not just preserving the claw for the visitors of this year or this decade. They are stewards for future generations. They are thinking about scientists 50, 100, or even 200 years from now who may have analytical techniques we cannot yet imagine. They understand that every time they intervene, they potentially alter the chemical signature of the object, which could compromise future research. This is why the principle of minimal intervention is so sacred. The goal is to stabilize the claw, to halt its deterioration, without erasing the evidence of its age and its unique preservation history. They are, in a very real sense, keeping a window to the past open, ensuring that this direct, tangible link to the world of the Moa remains intact and available for study and wonder, long after we are gone. The claw's journey from a dark cave chamber to a brightly lit museum might seem like the end of its story, but in reality, it was the beginning of a new, carefully managed chapter in its long, long life, a chapter dedicated to ensuring its silent testimony endures for centuries more to come. From a single beam of light in an otherwise unremarkable cave chamber to a global scientific marvel, the journey of the Mount Owen Moa Claw is a narrative that stretches across millennia. It began with a creature, a gentle giant browsing in a primeval forest 3,000 years ago, whose life ended in a way that led its remains into a perfect sanctuary of cold, dark, and stillness. There it waited, a secret held by the mountain, until a moment of chance and human curiosity brought it into the modern world, not as a crumbling fossil, but as a piece of life itself. This transition from hidden relic to museum centerpiece is more than just a story of discovery. It is a powerful demonstration of nature's hidden capacity for preservation, showing us that under the rarest of conditions, the Earth can pause time itself, gifting us with a direct, tangible link to a world we thought was lost to dust and memory. Standing before its display case today, the claw is so much more than an ancient artifact. It is a profound symbol of an entire lost world, a world of avian titans and aerial hunters, of forests that echoed with calls no human ear had ever heard. It represents a unique evolutionary experiment that played out in splendid isolation for millions of years, a testament to the incredible, branching paths that life can take when left to its own devices. This one object encapsulates the grandeur of that vanished ecosystem, the sheer scale of the Moa, the formidable power of the Haast's eagle, and the intricate balance that held it all together. To look upon it is to be given a fleeting glimpse through a crack in time, to feel the weight of a history that is both magnificent and deeply tragic, a reminder of the fragile, beautiful complexity of life on our planet and how swiftly it can be erased. Ultimately, this relic's most enduring message is a sobering one, serving as a permanent, poignant reminder of humanity's profound and often irreversible impact on the natural world. The claw's incredible preservation allowed it to bear witness to the final act of its species, offering silent testimony to a catastrophe that unfolded with staggering speed. It challenges us to confront the consequences of our actions, not as a distant, abstract concept, but as a visceral reality. The story of the Moa is a stark lesson in ecological interconnectedness, showing how the introduction of a new predator, the alteration of a landscape, and the relentless harvesting of a resource can converge to unravel a tapestry that took eons to weave. It is a lesson from the past that speaks directly to the conservation crises of our present, urging us to learn from this loss and to act with greater wisdom and foresight. So, as we conclude this journey into one of history's greatest enigmas, we're left to wonder about the stories that still lie hidden, waiting in the dark. What other marvels of preservation are tucked away in the world's unexplored caves and remote valleys, holding secrets we have yet to imagine? The discovery of the Mount Owen Claw proves that our planet still has the capacity to astonish us, to reveal truths that rewrite our understanding of the past. It's a call to remain curious, to support the scientists and explorers who push into the unknown, and to protect the wild places where such mysteries can still survive. We would love to hear which part of this incredible story resonated most with you. Was it the heart-pounding moment of discovery deep within the cave, the tragic and rapid downfall of the moa, the fearsome power of the Host's eagle, or the cutting-edge science that continues to unravel these mysteries. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's continue this exploration together. For in the end, the legacy we leave for future explorers isn't just about what we discover, but about what we choose to preserve and protect, ensuring that the wonders of our world do not become ghosts, remembered only in stories and a single, miraculous claw.